So in the last video, we talked about the Azure Application Gateway components. So in this video, we'll talk about the deploying an Azure Application Gateway. So what we are trying to achieve so when we type https://support.acutelearn.com, the request should get forwarded to the application gateway. And the application gateway should forward the request to the app services which are created. So I have these two app services created, acute support and acute support 1. And by default, these are not accessible from outside. So I see 403 forbidden error. The reason is I've disabled public access. So I disabled public access and we create a private endpoint. So I connected this particular app service to an Azure virtual network to one of the subnet called as an app services. And similarly, I have another app service. And this is also not accessible from outside. So I want to secure this application with the help of an application gateway. So again, this particular app service is connected to a subnet with a private endpoint. And we can see inbound address called as 1.20 and public access is disabled. So when I go to the virtual networks, so I have this virtual network having two subnets, one for gateway, one for app services. So the app gateway will connect to one of the subnet in order to reach these app services, because these app services are not publicly accessible. They are accessible only within the virtual network. So we'll try to achieve that. Now, as of now, when I say https support.acutelearn.com, I don't get anything. So it says the site cannot be reached for now. So in order to do that, basically what we need, so we need a listener, backend pool, backend settings, then health probe, rule, and DNS mapping. So first we'll deploy the application gateway. So during the deployment of the application gateway, so it is going to ask you the front-end IP and other things. We'll see. So I'm going to deploy an application gateway. I'm selecting a resource group. I'm giving a name, a proper name underscore. I'm saying called as an app gateway. And the location. And we see type standard V2 or a WAF V2. So we want the more security, then we can go for a WAF V2. If just a simple load balancing and application security, we can go with a standard V2. So I'm going with an WAF V2. Enable auto scaling. It means that based on the load, if there are too much traffic coming into an application gateway, so we can scale out. Instead of one instance, we can have 2-3 instances deployed, and it can automatically scale based on the application request. I'm saying I don't want an auto scaling. Instance count. So we can have 1 or 2 or 3 like that. So if I have 2 instances count, if one goes down, so I'll have another application gateway up and running. But for SV that, I'm just using only one instance count application gateway. So address type, then traffic. WAF policy, as we selected a WAF V2, it is going to ask you for a policy. I'm just creating an acute underscore WAF underscore policy. So later we will see what is the benefit of WAF policy. Now to which virtual network this is going to connect. So as part of this diagram, I see acute, VNet acute. So I'm selecting an VNet acute. And to which subnet I want to connect? A gateway subnet. So this gateway subnet should not have any kind of a routing table associated. Click on next. So we see front end. Public, a private. So when you select a public, so this application gateway is going to get a public IP address and will be accessible over the internet. And if you select a private, you'll get a private IP address within that particular virtual network. So you can deploy in both modes. One, you can have a public IP and private IP. As of now, I'm just selecting a public. Create a public IP address, acute underscore app gateway underscore public IP. So it's going to create a new public IP. If you already have some public IPs which are not in use, you can select that, or you can create a new public IP. So this is going to be our front end IP address. Now backends. So during the deployment of time, we can configure that, but I'm selecting a backend pool. I'm giving called as an support underscore backend pool one pool. Now target types, we can specify an IP address of the app service or a virtual machine, or we can select a virtual machine and it will displace the NIC card of the virtual machine. If you have a virtual machine scale set, then you can select a virtual machine scale set and the virtual machine scale set. And I'm using an app services, so I'm selecting an app service. It shows me the list of app services. So I'm selecting an acute support, app service, and support one. Now I'm adding these two app services into an app gateway backend pool. Okay. So I'm creating a backend pool called as a support pool. So let me put up another diagram where it becomes easy. So this is an application gateway, and we created a front-end IP and a public IP, which is public. And we have created a backend pool, support underscore backend pool. And this backend pool, where there are two app services, are part of this particular backend pool. So this is what we created so far. So during the deployment of the app gateway, we are creating a backend pool. Add it. Next configuration. We would see front end, we would see a backend pool, a routing. So we are creating a rule. The rule name, I'm giving support.acutelearn.com. Priority, I'm giving 10. The listener name. So it is going to create a listener automatically, hyphen a listener. So is it going to be an HTTP or HTTPS? So if I select an HTTPS, then I need to provide an SSL certificate. I'm just uploading my SSL certificate. Support dot and listener type basic, because my URL is only a simple. I'm selecting this one. Click on add And you need to select a backend targets. So as part of that, we are creating a listener called as a listener. And which is going to listen for a traffic for support.acutelearn.com, which is on a port number 443. And we're creating a rule, which is a rule which is going to distribute or handle the traffic, that any request which is received for this listener, it should forward to this particular backend pool. And we need a backend settings. So we'll create a backend settings. So the rule, I'm giving a rule name as support.acutelearn.com listener. Go to the backend targets, backend pool. So I'm selecting a support backend pool. So we are telling that any traffic received on this listener should forward to this backend pool. And backend settings, as of now, nothing has been configured. I'm just configuring a backend. Backend settings, I'm calling it as in support underscore backend settings. And the backend settings, so these app services are running on HTTPS, which is 443 port number. So the backend app services are running on a protocol HTTPS and 443. So I'm selecting in the backend setting that the backend protocol is an HTTPS and 443. So when an app gateway is communicating with these app services, it will use the HTTPS and 443 port to reach them. And we would see validation certificate. As we are using an HTTPS, the SSL certificate is being used here. Is it a valid certificate or a custom provided? Okay, based on that, you can select. So it is a public CA issued because Microsoft is a public this thing. And override host name. So what does it mean by it? So when a user types support.acutelearn.com, the application gateway is going to forward the header to this particular app service as support.acutelearn.com. But this particular one is having acute support.azurewebsites.net. So the name is different. So what happens is we get an error. So I'm saying here, override a host name, pick up a host name from a backend target. So automatically, I'm telling that. So when the application gateway is communicating with the app service, take the app service name and communicate so that we don't get any issue. Otherwise, what happens? The support.acutelearn.com header will be forwarded to this one and we receive an error message. Click on add and click on add. Click on tags, review and create. It says validation failed something. SSL certificate password is incorrect. So let me see what password I gave for the certificate. Okay. I gave this certificate. Yeah, validation pass, create. Typically, it would take 10 to 15 minutes of time to deploy an application gateway. So now the application gateway got deployed. Let's go to the application gateway. So we would see front-end IP. So it got a public IP. We create a backend pool during the deployment. We can see support underscore backend pool with the two targets, that is app services. So during the deployment, we provided a backend settings. So it created a backend settings and it created a listener, support.acutelearn.com, and it created a rules, support.acutelearn.com, as a rule which is going to forward the traffic from a listener to backend targets. I'm going to the front-end IP. Now I'm just saying, so I don't have this. So we created a listener, backend pool, backend settings, health probe. As I said, by default, it takes the default. If you want, we can create our own health probe. So we created a rule during the deployment. Now we need to create a DNS record pointing to this one. So I'm going to my DNS. I'm saying add a DNS record, support.acutelearn.com. And let me take the public IP of the front-end IP of the application gateway, the front-end IP. Save it. Yeah. Sometimes the DNS records gets updated immediately. Sometimes it would take some 5 to 10 minutes or half an hour. Let me ping and see whether it is getting a correct IP address. Yeah. So we can see that it is giving in the front-end IP, which we configured, mapped to this one. So now what is happening here now? So we have mapped the support.acutelearn.com to a front-end IP, and we created rules and everything. Now let me go to the browser and just say refresh. Now it is giving a certificate error because the certificate which I used it is not I would say an authorized certificate. There is a reason why we are getting error, but we can see that your web app is running and waiting for your content. Now what happened now? So now when I'm typing an HTTPS support.acutelearn.com, the request is going to the application gateway. The listener is listening, accepting the traffic. The rule is basically forwarding the traffic to the backend to app services which are configured, which are part of this particular backend pool. So that's how we can configure the basic or the deploy the application gateway, application gateway.